of the Showcase of Undergraduate Scholars. Should be an exciting day. This is the first session, and we are going to hear from mainly psychology presentations. So just to go over a few housekeeping items, just as a reminder, this presentation is being recorded. Questions are definitely encouraged, so please use your Q&A to type in any questions. Yesterday, I had a few students who were more comfortable just verbally asking. I'm okay with that. Lynn, are you okay with that?
Yes, we did that in our session.
Yeah, so either way, if you're having trouble viewing the questions, Lynn or I will read them to you. And so the raise hand button on the bottom is disabled, so don't use that, okay? And I just want to introduce Lynn Heiler, who is going to be with us this morning, and she will be moderating this session, okay? All right, so without further ado, shall we get started? Our first presenter, Chelsea Bass. Chelsea, are you ready to present?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Chelsea, I'll come on when you have about 3 minutes left to cue you in so we can get some Q&A in as well, okay?
Okay.
Good luck.
Oh, am I sharing my poster or are you guys sharing?
Yeah, no, you are, Chelsea.
Okay, I see.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we can see it.
All right. Hello, my name is Chelsea, and I'm going to be talking to you today about how family conversations about sex relate to feelings of support and future parenthood among LGBTQ+ people. So, something underrepresented in the past research is what parents tell their LGBTQ+ adolescents about sex. What past research there is tells us that they often don't get sex information that's relevant to their LGBTQ+ identity, which can be associated with adverse mental and sexual health outcomes. We also know that the scripts in the US surrounding sex are largely hetero and cis-normative, which may lead to LGBTQ+ people feeling at odds with future parenthood. However, positive mental health and life satisfaction are correlated with greater social support and gender congruence, or one's comfort with their own gender. And we explored the contents of what people talked about with their parents about sex, and if they had any correlation with some of these social outcome measures like feelings towards future parenthood, perceived social support, and gender congruence. So we had 433 participants ranging from age 18 to 69. They were 30 on average, and the majority of participants were cisgender women and bisexual. And these are our measures. So we had closed and open-ended questions, including, did your parents talk to you about sex? What did you talk about? And if not, what do you wish you would have talked about? We used a content analysis framework to examine these responses. We had the conceptual future parent grief scale, which assesses the presence of negative feelings towards the possibility of not becoming a parent for LGBTQ+ individuals, and higher scores showed higher grief. We had the multidimensional scale of perceived social support, which assesses the support one feels they have from family, friends, and significant others, and higher scores indicate higher perceived support. And lastly, we had the transgender congruence scale, which assesses the degree to which one feels that their appearance matches their gender identity. And again, higher scores indicate higher gender congruence. So as for the codes from our content analysis, Myself and 2 assistant coders found the following. We found a code called identity relevance, which indicated that participants received sex information relevant to their LGBTQ plus identity or LGBTQ plus identities broadly. We had the code positive framing, which indicated that participants received sex information implying that having sex is okay and a normal part of life. We had sex averse framing, which indicated that participants received sex information implying sex is not okay or framed sex in a negative light. And for our final code, we looked at responses from participants who did not get sex information from their parents. And this code, titled LGBTQ plus support, indicated that participants mentioned wishing their parents had given them more sex information relevant to their LGBTQ plus identity. And as for some results, the sex positive framing code was the one to pop up the most frequently. And as for the LGBTQ plus support code, there was a significant difference. Gay participants showed this more than bisexual participants, and bisexual participants showed it more than lesbian participants. And then cisgender men participants showed it more than gender minority participants, and they showed it more than cisgender women participants. Gender minority participants reported lower perceived social support and gender congruence than cisgender participants. And participants who had positive framed sex information had greater gender congruence. So what are some of the implications of all of this? Overall, we saw a variety of topics that LGBTQ plus adolescents talked about with their parents. On a positive note, positively framed sex information showed up the most. We also found the association between comfort with one's gender and positively framed information. So all of this provides a good starting point for future research addressing the role of discussions about sex. The social outcomes varying by gender identity is consistent with existing literature that there is need for increased support for gender minority people. And the difference in code frequencies of the final code suggests that identity groups such as gay individuals and cisgender men are getting information about LGBTQ plus identities at a lower rate than people with other identities, which is important to note for future implementation of more effective sex discussions. And in the future, more targeted study design and recruitment could be used to determine to what degree sex education conversations have an impact on one's comfort with their LGBTQ plus identity, and more nuanced subcategories of how parents frame sex could also be useful for future research.
Great job. That was very good. I bet you it's very, very interesting. Yes?
Yes, thank you.
Any of our guests, other panelists or guests in the audience have any questions for Chelsea, please post them in the Q&A, or you may unmute if you feel comfortable doing that and ask a live question as well. Okay. In the chat box we have from Calisse, what was the most interesting result to you personally?
I thought that the most interesting result was that let's see, the difference between participants that expressed that they wish that their parents would have told them more about LGBTQ plus identities. I thought that was interesting, just in that, you know, I didn't, like, for example, I didn't expect that to not show up in the lesbian participants, and I just thought it was interesting that there was a significant difference.
Okay. Good deal. Are there any other questions for Chelsea? While we wait just for a second, because sometimes there's a delay in questions. So tell me how you got involved in research, Chelsea.
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to be in research from when I entered college, and so I just, was on the lookout for labs that were bringing in new research assistants. and I found Dr. Farr's lab, and it was interesting to me because of the developmental aspect, and they ended up being a perfect fit for me.
So, but is research because you just wanted a different experience at UK, or is it to help you beyond UK into either grad school or into your career?
Yeah, so I want to go into research for my career, and it's also going to help me get into grad school.
Okay, both, yeah. Can never go wrong, in my opinion, with
Mhm.
where research is. So we have another question for you from Natalie. It says, what sparked your initial interest in this research? Question. A little different than my question.
Yeah, so I'm also interested in health psychology research. That's kind of the direction that I want to go into in the future. So I liked that this question was kind of a nice combination between health psychology kind of topics and then like developmental kind of topics.
We have one in the
Yeah, I'm
Q&A.
seeing one in the Q&A from Kay. If you could do this again, what would you change? So if I could do this again, I would probably redesign the survey to be just specific to this study, because the survey, the data that I used are from a bigger survey that asked, a lot of different topics and categories of questions. So I would have made it more specific to this study, and I would have maybe asked, for example, only the people that didn't get sex information answered the final question about what they wish their parents would have told them. And I probably would have asked this question to all of the participants just to get a little bit more data.
All right. Thank you, Chelsea. Good job.
Thank you. Should I stop sharing now?
You may stop sharing at any time. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, cool.
Our next presenter is Calisse. And we are going to wait for Evie to show your presentation slide.
We may have to, oh goodness, let's see. Computers. Can you see that yet or no?
We can
No.
see your computer, yeah.
But you can't see Kalisse's.
No, and it just all went away.
Okay. Let's just go on and I'll work on this as Calisse is presenting.
We can,
I'll show it at the end.
yeah. Well, we can insert it later too for the beginning. So Calisse, you're up. You may start sharing your screen at any time.
Okie dokie.
And I'll come back on when you have at least 3 minutes left so we can get some Q&A in.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
All right.
Right ahead.
Let me move y'all so I can see the whole screen. All right. Are you ready?
Yes, go right ahead. We can see everything.
Perfect. My name is Kalee Brand, and I will be talking to you today about feelings of openness and acceptance towards oneself, family, and others for youth with LGBTQ+ parents. So despite recently increasingly visible families with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer parents becoming more visible as pathways to family have become more accessible, there is a distinct gap in the literature for these families, especially their children. And there is also a distinct gap in the literature for geographically, racially, ethnically, and economically diverse families. And that's particularly important because compared to families headed by cisgender heterosexual parents, LGBTQ+ parent families disproportionately are geographically, racially, ethnically, and economically diverse. So in an attempt to fill that gap in literature, this study is focusing on the research question, in what ways do parents' LGBTQ plus identity relate to their child's feelings of openness and or acceptance about others, themselves, and their families? This study was based on interview data from a larger research study, and it uses data from 49 youth. Questions of interest in this study were taken from the broader interview that was focused on youth's feelings about the ways in which their parents raised them, how they think about what it means to have or be a family, the biggest challenges and most positive aspects about having an LGBTQ plus parent, and what advice they would give to other youth with LGBTQ plus parents. This study was conducted following thematic analysis guidelines, where a team of 2 coders read through interview transcriptions and isolated themes that appeared consistently and or were of note or striking to the coders. The themes that were pulled from this interview data are presented in the table in the center of the screen, and we isolated 4 themes: feelings of openness and acceptance towards others, themselves, family, and then we had a 4th code that was concerning the desired feelings of normalcy for these youth. Sub-themes included, obviously, acceptance towards others and towards themselves and their family, but those others or themselves and the family were broken down into 2 sub-themes, which involved advice about themselves and how participants felt their parents raised them in the home. They also had advice about family, and then we talked about love makes a family discourse, which talked about chosen families and participants' feelings about having expanded families, not based on biology or blood, but instead based on love or choice. And the number of participants that endorse each of these primary sub-themes are included after the description of the sub-theme. The results of the study suggest that youth with LGBTQ+ parents feel that they were raised to not only be open and accepting of others, but also open and accepting of themselves, which is particularly important because many interviewees reported negative interactions with others based on their parents' sexual identities or gender identities, which points to an interesting interaction between parents and their children in helping their children develop those feelings of openness and acceptance, and potentially developing unique coping mechanisms that lean towards positive parenting tactics. Importantly, these results demonstrate that youth with LGBTQ+ parents do feel that they are being raised to be more accepting of themselves and others. And there was a particularly unique point in which many of these participants endorsed the theme that openness and acceptance was unique to their parents in comparison to their peers with cisgender heterosexual parents. And participants also reported that they had an expanded idea of family. Participants regularly endorsed that they had families based on choice and love, and they also felt that that was unique compared to their peers with cisgender heterosexual parents. Yeah. Thank you.
The kitty just wanted to come in for the last bit.
Yes, I know. She really interrupted my flow.
I'll mark her as an additional attendee.
Oh, yes. I'm surprised the other one isn't attending. She was attacking my arm through the first half of it. So he really said, pay attention to me.
So if anyone has any questions, I see one right now. Let me go ahead and just start with that one. I'm not sure if you can see the Q&A box, but
Yes.
Kate asks, who would you like to have seen in the selfie sample that wasn't represented? Example, younger kids, those from different religious backgrounds, etc.
Yeah, so for context, I don't know that I mentioned it in my presentation, but this interview data was taken from a larger sample, and it was the selfie study. And to answer this question, I think I would have really liked to see younger kids. my lab has done other research in the CAF study with younger kids. I think I would have liked to see a similar protocol here. I think younger kids would be really interesting, particularly when looking at disclosure experiences, and see how other youth react to their parents' sexual and gender identity. And I think it would be particularly interesting in addition for their feelings about what makes up a family, because they're just beginning to develop those constructs. I think it'd be really interesting to see how they feel about those family identities.
Our next question is from Alyssa, and she said, what was your most interesting result personally?
Most interesting. I really liked, in terms of interesting, I really liked the desired feelings of normalcy code. It wasn't endorsed by a huge amount of participants. It was endorsed by about 10% of the participants, but I thought it was really interesting that any participants felt strongly that they wanted others to believe that their families were normal, particularly because so much of the other themes involved around acceptance at a point blank level. So I thought it was interesting, and in the future, it would be interesting to look at which participants endorse desired feelings of normalcy compared to their feelings about acceptance of others, themselves, and families, and see if the same participants were endorsing both codes. That isn't something I did at this level, but it would be something interesting to do in the future, because there seems to be some level, not very much contradiction in those feelings, but enough for it to be interesting to me.
That's one of the great things about being here at UK, is that you can have future goals and obtain them just because of our resources that are available.
Yeah.
Well, good job, Calisse. Thank you very much. Okay. You can stop sharing. And our next presenter is Anna Garlock. And I know she was not here, but I believe there she is. All right.
Okay.
Anna, I'll come back on when you have about 3 minutes left, just to make sure that we have time for Q&A. So
Perfect.
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Anna Garlock, and my project is on the Therapeutic Alliance in the Unified Protocol. My mentors for this project were Dr. Shannon Sauer-Zavala and Dr. Matt Southward. So the Therapeutic Alliance refers to the working relationship between therapists and patients, and is thought to consist of 3 main components. The first is goal alliance, or therapeutic goals, which refers to the agreement between therapist and patient about what they're trying to achieve in treatment. Task alliance, or the tasks of therapy, refers to the agreement about the treatment activities completed to reach these goals. And finally, we have the therapeutic bond, which refers to the more personal relationship between therapist and patient. While previous research has shown that the therapeutic alliance as a whole and its individual components are associated with symptom change in treatment, there's still a great deal of uncertainty surrounding the direction of this relationship. More specifically, previous research has not measured these constructs frequently enough throughout treatment to be able to determine temporal ordering. So the goal of this current study was to test whether intensive session-to-session change in the alliance predicted or was predicted by symptoms in transdiagnostic cognitive behavioral therapy. So our first hypothesis was that with in-person ratings of goal and task alliance would predict session-to-session changes in anxiety and depressive symptoms, potentially by motivating patients to practice the skills that they learn in treatment. Our second hypothesis was that session-to-session reductions in anxiety and depression symptoms would predict stronger ratings of the therapeutic bond, as feeling better may lead patients to view their therapists more favorably. And finally, our third hypothesis was that with in-person ratings of the therapeutic bond would predict greater improvements in feelings of loneliness, as developing a connection with the therapist may address certain aspects of this experience. We tested these hypotheses by disaggregating stable between-person differences and within-person fluctuations over time within our sample of 59 treatment-seeking individuals from UK and the state of Kentucky that completed treatment. Participants were randomized to receive either 6 or 12 sessions of the unified protocol and receive the treatments modules either in the standard condition order or in order personalized to them based on their strengths and weaknesses. Before each session, patients completed a series of questionnaires that included the overall depression severity and impairment scale, the overall anxiety severity and impairment scale, and the 3-item loneliness scale. And at the end of their session, they completed the Working Alliance Inventory, which consists of 3 subscales that assess the different alliance components. We used hierarchical linear modeling to assess the temporal relationships between the alliance and symptom change. Contrary to my hypotheses, we found that the alliance actually did not predict session-to-session symptom change, and anxiety and loneliness did not predict alliance development. However, consistent with my second hypothesis, we did find that with in-person reductions in depression symptoms predicted session-to-session increases in ratings of the therapeutic bond. With in-person reductions in depression symptoms also predicted increases in goal and task alliance, as well as overall alliance ratings. This means that when a person came to their session feeling less depressed than their personal average, they tended to rate their alliance stronger than they did at their previous session. At the between person level, we also found that there was an association between the therapeutic bond and depressive symptoms, so that individuals that reported a stronger therapeutic bond across all sessions tended to experience fewer depressive symptoms. While previous research using less frequent measures might lead us to think that alliance development leads to symptom improvement, breaking it down further shows that it may be symptoms, and depression in particular, that affect formation of the alliance. This particular effect of depression may be due to decreased feelings of hopelessness about the future and greater optimism about the prospects of working with a therapist, but more research is needed to better understand this connection. The lack of effect found in the relationship between loneliness and the therapeutic alliance is particularly interesting to me, as it suggests that patients are not viewing the time they spend with their therapist as a social interaction, despite the conceptual aspect of the therapeutic bond. In practice, these findings suggest that targeting depressive symptoms may lead to a stronger therapeutic alliance, although the direct benefits of the alliance on symptom change were not clear in this particular sample. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Anna. That's very good. So if you have any questions for Anna, if you could pop them in the Q&A, that would be great. Or you may unmute. Sometimes there's a bit of a delay. So tell me how you got involved in research, Anna.
I got involved in research my sophomore year, and I'm a graduating senior now. And yeah, I just was very interested in kind of applying everything that I was learning in my classes to the real world. And in the past 2 years, I've been able to work in 2 research labs and get a lot of cool experience doing different tasks within those. So I've really enjoyed my time with it.
Good deal. Okay, I believe we have a question. Well, you have 2 comments in the chat that says really nice job and very interesting and good job. And then we do have a question from Matt. It says, great talk, Anna. If the alliance doesn't directly impact symptom changes, do you think it could impact other processes in treatment?
Yeah, definitely. I know that we've done some preliminary analyses with this sample that shows that development of the alliance might impact skill use, and skill use can then in turn impact symptom improvement. So I think there are a lot of different directions that we could take with this data set to see where else we might find the effects and benefits of developing a strong alliance. Thank you for your question. Oh, I think you're muted.
You're exactly right. The second question is, I know you used patient self-report here, but could you talk a little bit about your experience listening to the tapes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have another way that you can assess the therapeutic alliance is by having observer ratings. So we have audio recordings of all of the sessions from this treatment study that I spent this year listening to. So we haven't completed listening to those tapes, so we haven't been able to run the analyses, but I think that'd be a really interesting thing once we are able to do that, to see First off, how strongly correlated the patient ratings and the observer ratings are, and then to see if there are different findings with symptom change within the observer ratings.
Most of your research was done remote due to COVID?
Yes.
Good deal. I'm glad we were able to still resume some type of research activities on campus. It was very challenging for my program as well, but lots of success.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so if there's not any more questions for Anna, we will go to our next presenter. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Evie, are you able to show the title slides, or should we just insert those later?
Yeah, we'll just have to insert them later. I
Okay.
have no idea. True technical difficulty.
Okay, no problem.
It happened to me yesterday as well, and it just will fix itself on its own if I keep trying.
All right, well, so our next presenter is Anna Phan. And Anna, you may get started at any time. I will come back on when you have about 3 minutes left so we can do some Q&A. You may share your screen anytime.
Okay. Hello, my name is Anna Phan, and I worked with Dr. Jonathan Golding on the impact of cultural differences between a jailhouse informant and a defendant on jury verdict. So what exactly is a jailhouse informant? A jailhouse informant, or a JI, is an individual who is being detained and awaiting trial or sentencing and claims to know that they have heard information directly from the accused suspect, also known as the defendant. And they are called upon by the prosecutor to testify against that defendant in court. And the reason we are studying this is because JI presence has been shown to have an effect on jury decisions in the verdict reached for the criminal trials, typically rendering in higher guilty verdicts. And this is an issue because although the presence of a jailhouse informant may appear to assist the legal system in attaining justice, the presence of the JIs can be problematic because the information they provide may not always be truthful or accurate, resulting in false convictions. And they may provide these false testimonies because the incentives they receive for testifying. And so we wanted to investigate whether the differing backgrounds of the JI and the defendant would influence the believability of their interactions and whether jury members would still find them credible. So based on this, our hypotheses were that conditions where there was a JI present would yield higher guilty verdicts than control conditions without a JI. And our second hypothesis was conditions where the defendant and a JI share the same cultural background or affiliation would also yield higher guilty verdicts than conditions where they did not share the same background. And so for this study, we recruited our participants from Amazon's Mechanical Turk system. Originally, we had over 200 participants, but after excluding the ones who did not meet the comprehension checks or manipulation checks, we ended up with 142 participants, with them ranging from ages 19 to 68 and being 74 females and 68 males. And with these participants we gathered data using the Qualtrics survey system. So for our study, we used a 2x2x2 design where the jailhouse informant's background was either a neo-Nazi or Muslim. The defendant's background was also neo-Nazi or Muslim, and the participant gender was male or female. In the control conditions, without a JI present, we provided the participants with another individual to testify in their place, which was a neighborhood mailman. And so for our study, we provided the participants with a criminal trial summary that gave them a general description of a first-degree rape perpetrated by an adult male against a young female child. And both the witnesses for the prosecution and the defense's case, the instructions from the judge, and final closing arguments from the defense and the prosecution. After they read the criminal trial summary, participants completed a trial questionnaire asking about the victim's age, how they rated the defendant's guilt, they rendered their verdict, and they provided their confidence in their verdict, as well as their reasoning for their verdict. And then they had to answer a series of questions rating different aspects of the victim or defendant and the JI on a Likert scale from 1 to 10, such as how guilty do you believe they are, how credible do you believe they are, and so on. And so for our results, we used one-way ANOVAs to analyze the data. And the results showed that our first hypothesis was not supported, as there was not a significant difference in conditions where a JI was present to testify versus those without one. As you can see from figure 1, where both of them have about 60% or higher voting guilty and about 30-40% voting not guilty. And then our second hypothesis was also not supported, as the interactions between the jailhouse informant and the defendant their backgrounds were not significant for any of the dependent variables. So in figure 2, you can see these are the 3 conditions out of 6 where the defendant was Jewish. And in all of these conditions, they were also about the same, where about 50% of them voted guilty and 45 to 50% of them voted not guilty. However, one result that we did not expect were that conditions where the where the defendant was not a Nazi, those conditions resulted in higher guilty verdicts as well. And in those conditions, nearly 60% to 77% of participants voted guilty for them. So future implications for this research, contrary to our expectations, as we said, the results showed non-significant effects of JI presence as well as defendant and JI background on jury verdict. However, these studies are still important because JIs don't always tell the truth, and people still depend on them as secondary evidence, especially in criminal trials where there is no evidence at all. And some limitations we had on this were the fact that, unlike a real trial where where jury members are able to deliberate with each other to process the information they're provided, they were not able to do that in this. So they had to base their verdicts solely on what they understood without any help from anyone else. And another limitation was if the conditions were different and the defendant and JI backgrounds were different but still somewhat similar, such as opposing gangs, rather than completely different like cultural backgrounds, would the results still be the same? Thank you.
Very good, Anna. This has always been some good research that has piqued my interest as well. So if anybody has any questions for Anna, you can unmute, put them in the Q&A chat box, whatever how you want to do that. We have a few minutes left while we wait for that transition. Anna, tell me how you got involved in doing research with Dr. Golding.
So I've always been interested in criminal justice and forensics, and I took Psych 320 with Dr. Golding my freshman or sophomore year, and I reached out to him to work with him as a research assistant later on, and I've been working with him for the last 3 years on research.
What do you want to do in your career when you graduate?
Originally, I was hoping to do something with the criminal justice system, maybe work with law enforcement, or maybe work as an expert witness. But for right now, I'm still trying to see what opportunities are available.
Sometimes having too many is not good either, but it's great. It has its pros and cons, obviously. So we have a question for you from Shania. If you were to replicate this study, what would you change or do differently?
So as I said before in the limitations, the conditions were, we had to originally we were going to use opposing gangs, but we thought that those conditions were too similar and we didn't know how to differentiate them enough. But I would like to see that replicated to see if that makes any difference. We chose neo-Nazi and Jewish in the end because people know that in reality, those groups of people probably would not be interacting with each other. However, I'd like to see if members like of opposing gangs would influence the believability of their interactions in any way.
All right, great job, Anna. Thank you so much. Okay, so our next presenter is Natalie. Hello.
Hi.
All right, look, she got her computer working. Natalie Vincent is our next presenter. And Natalie, you may share your screen at any time and get started. And I will pop back in when you have about 3 minutes left if you don't finish before then.
All right. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Natalie Vincent and I am presenting this poster project from Dr. Brown's psychology lab. And so some of the work that we do in this research lab is dealing with how racial and gender stereotypes develop in younger children and adolescents, and their perceptions of gender and ethnic discrimination, and what possible interventions may be used to combat such issues. And so my work today is called Hitting Back and Hitting On, and it investigates attitudes about cross-sex conflict and how they predict attitudes about sexual harassment. And so for some background on this topic, we have previous research discussing peer-to-peer sexual harassment and how it's pretty common in adolescence, and how a lot of the previous research has examined who the targets of sexual harassment are and their negative effects of sexual harassment. However, the gap in the research that we have found is that we don't know a whole lot about what predicts sexual harassment. And so this current study tries to examine the relationship between early adolescents' attitudes about cross-sex conflict and their attitudes about sexual harassment. And so the hypothesis for this study is that we hypothesized opinions on retaliation can accurately predict attitudes of sexual harassment. So the participants for this study consisted of 142 seventh grade students, some are girls, and the mean age was about 12 and a half years old. One thing we pride ourselves on in this study is the ethnic composition of the participants. If you can see the pie chart at the bottom left of your screen, we have less than half of the participants who identified as white, and kind of a large diversity of the others. So we have 20% who identified as Latino or Hispanic, another 20% is African American, and then other is about 14%. And so some of the methods we used to conduct this study was a correlational study, and the data was gathered in one sitting in a middle school. And so participants completed a questionnaire that assessed various attitudes of sexual harassment, gender role behaviors, and attitudes towards school. And so those questions were formed in a Likert scale of options ranging from 1 being never okay to 4 always okay, as well as 1 being strongly disagree and 4 to strongly agree. And so some example questions of endorsement of sexual harassment included: how much is it okay to either make unwanted sexual comments, jokes, gestures, or looks about someone? Another example was: how much is it okay to call somebody gay or lesbian in a negative way? And then other example questions of endorsement of retaliation: is it okay for a girl to hit a boy if he hit her first? And suppose a girl says something bad to a boy, do you think it is wrong for him to scream at her? And that was getting at the verbal retaliation, the first one being physical retaliation. And so for our results, we conducted a regression to see if the endorsement of sexual harassment predicts the endorsement of retaliation. And the results indicated that both boys and girls believe that when retaliation is acceptable against the opposite sex, sexual harassment directed towards the opposite sex is acceptable too. Attitudes accepting of verbal or physical retaliation significantly predicted attitudes that claim sexual harassment is acceptable for both boys and girls. We found that it was a positive correlation between the two. And in other words, boys who think it is okay to retaliate, either verbally or physically, against a girl, also think it is okay to commit sexual harassment against girls too. And the same occurs vice versa. And so if you look to the top right corner of your screen, you see the figure here that shows the relationship broken in between girls and boys. And so we see that kind of in the acceptability of cross-sex retaliation, when it is low for girls and boys, it is also low for their sexual harassment attitudes. And it tends to grow in the positive direction when it is high in acceptability. Sexual harassment attitudes are also higher in frequency there. And we noticed something interesting about this study is that it shows a greater difference. So with boys, the relationship seems to be stronger and more acceptability of those sexual harassment attitudes than girls. And we believe it is interesting because almost girls have a double standard in a way that they believe it's okay to retaliate to a degree, but not so much as that the boys believe that it is okay to retaliate. And so in conclusion, the correlation is important because we want to understand the predictors of sexual harassment perpetration, and how they can provide vital insight into what kind of academic interventions we can implement to target these sexual harassment issues and concerns. Future research should investigate what the individual differences may affect their likelihood of cross-sex retaliation and sexual harassment. Like any study, it has its limitations, so this was correlational. We cannot determine causal inferences from our results. Study participants may have had trouble differentiating between sexual harassment and aggressions of retaliation. And lastly, social desirability from the participants may have led to ingenuine responses and inaccurate data. And a common issue with gender segregated groups in like younger peer groups, so like elementary age, children are typically more accepting of violence between gender groups. And so this is an issue among children in these social situations. They don't know yet how to correctly interact between genders. And so this issue is exacerbated once children become of adolescent age in middle school. And so yes, it is important to know that this correlation here is significant so that we know how to correctly intervene and show them the right ways to interact between gender and hopefully decrease the likelihood of sexual harassment in the future.
All right, good job. Thank you, Natalie. Alyssa comments, great job. I'm not sure if anybody can see the chat. If anybody has any questions for Natalie, if you could pop them in the Q&A box, in the chat box, open your mic and ask directly. But while we wait for someone to do that, as there is typically a delay, can you tell me what was, aside from the pandemic, what was the most challenging aspect of your research?
Yeah, so I would say the most challenging aspect was kind of not being able to get more participants for this study. I think like another limitation is the size. It's I would say a good moderate size, but with the pandemic, it definitely put a pause on research collection. So that was a challenge there.
Okay. So not just were you remote only?
Yes.
You doing your research, but just I think a lot of folks probably had fatigue with just being on the computer in general. So yeah,
Mhm.
that leads to a lot of it, unfortunately, in a lot of things. Another question that I have is, so how did you get involved in doing research in the lab that you were in?
Yeah, so back in my sophomore year, I'm a junior here now, and I took developmental psychology as part of my course requirements, and I really was interested in kind of these gender and racial stereotype topics. And my professor at the time directed me to talk to Dr. Brown. And at the same time, I was also involved in a program called Girls on the Run, which deals with kind of empowering young women, or young girls in elementary schools. And so it just seemed like a really good fit for me to also see about academic options in there.
It's a great program, Girls on the Run.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you do have a question. We have a few more seconds. I'm going to go ahead and end my timer. Do you think that there would be differences in SHA in the LGBTQ community, such as in transgender children?
I would agree. Yes, I think there would be. I think there would be less of a relationship. So not sure we would find an effect in the LGBTQ community. I think maybe because of their background, they're more aware of just different things such as aggressive behavior or like microaggressions. And unless there is, a significant sample in our, participants who maybe like use retaliation or sexual harassment as like a defense mechanism, I would argue there would be a much lower frequency of verbal and physical retaliation.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Natalie. Great job.
Thank you.
It's good to hear from you. Okay. We will move on to our next presenter, Alyssa Williams.
Hello.
There she is. Hello. You may share your screen and begin at any time. I'll come back on when you have about 3 minutes.
Okay,
So
thank
we
you.
have time for Q&A. Go ahead.
Okay, so I was looking at the impact of age on stalking trials with Dr. Golding this semester and last semester. We were looking at criminal stalking or a pattern of harassment, attention, or contact in any form that is unwanted and directed at a specific person that could cause that person reasonable fear. We looked at previous study by Dr. Golding as well as Dunlap, and they looked at the victim and defendant being the same age but different genders. And there was 2 experiments in this study, but I chose to look at experiment 1 mainly because it was focusing on the victim and defendant. And the main focus of experiment 1 was whether males or females would render more guilty verdicts in the stalking case. The results showed that women were more likely to render guilty verdicts than males. And the results also showed that the prototypical intimate stalking scenario, which is a female victim, male perpetrator, was the most believable and was given the guilty verdict most often. So we wanted to extend this research by examining mock jurors' perceptions of ex-intimate stalking involving younger and older victims and defendants. So we had 2 hypotheses in the study. The first one was that there will be more guilty verdicts in the 25-year-old victim defendant scenario compared to the 55-year-old victim defendant scenario. And hypothesis 2 was that female participants, or mock jurors in this case, will be more pro-victim, so they will give more guilty verdicts than males will. The method of this study We had 118 participants, 60 were females and 58 were males, and they were community members that were recruited from the online site Mechanical Turk. We used a 2x2 between participants design with age of victim and defendant, those two 25 and 55-year-old categories, and the female and male participant genders. The materials for the participants were a trial summary and a trial questionnaire. Mock jurors read a fictional criminal first-degree stalking trial in which there was either the 25-year-old or 55-year-old scenario where a male was accused of stalking the same aged woman. So it was 25-year-old male and 25-year-old female, or 55-year-old male and 55-year-old female. The stalking occurred at the victim's place of employment, their apartment complex, a lunch spot, and a gym. The events of the stalking were summarized from the victim and defendant's point of view, and other testimony was given from friends and a security guard of each of the victim and the defendant. The different conditions included variations in the victim and defendant age, like I had mentioned. After reading the trial summary, mock jurors rendered a decision for the plaintiff or defendant and determined whether or not the defendant was guilty. Then the participants answered a series of questions about the case. For example, how believable was the victim? How credible do you believe that the victim was? How honest do you think that the defendant was? Participants read through the trial summary and completed the questions based on the trial using Qualtrics, and the survey took approximately 20 minutes to complete. So our results, as seen in figure 1 down here at the bottom, the age of the defendant and victim did have a significant effect on the verdict. So hypothesis 1, that there will be more guilty verdicts in the 25-year-old scenario, was supported. And this is shown right here. They had approximately 45 guilty verdicts versus 41 guilty verdicts in the 55-year-old scenario. And then also, as seen in figure 2, the results supported hypothesis 2 that females will be more pro-victim and will render more guilty verdicts than males. This is shown in their rendering over 50 guilty verdicts compared to males around 35 guilty verdicts. The results of the study showed that if the defendant and victim are younger, mock jurors were more likely to render a guilty verdict of criminal stalking. In addition, the gender of the mock juror impacted the rendering of the guilty verdict, like I had mentioned. Limitations of this study included not manipulating the gender of the victim or defendant. It's possible there would be fewer guilty verdicts had it been a non-traditional stalking case. For example, a male stalking a male or a female stalking a female. Furthermore, there's a limitation in not studying whether or not an age difference between the victim and defendant would impact the amount of guilty and not guilty verdicts. For example, would there be a difference in guilty verdicts if the victim was 25 and the perpetrator was 55, or vice versa? Finally, because the participants completed the survey individually and online, there's no control over participants, nor were there any jury deliberations like there would be in an actual criminal stalking case. In the future, it would be important to manipulate the gender of the victim and defendant. A larger between participants design would allow that and would allow to examine non-typical stalking cases. Similarly, it would be important to examine age differences between the victim and defendant to look at whether a younger victim and older stalking perpetrator or a older victim and younger perpetrator would have these same results. And finally, future research should just be more ecologically valid and more similar to actual jury trials than this one happened to be. So thank you.
Perfect timing. You must have practiced. Congratulations. That was really good. You did a great job.
Thank you.
So while we wait for any questions to pop in the Q&A or in the chat box, so tell me how you got involved in doing research.
I have been in Dr. Golding's classes for the past couple years. I started off in his forensic class and was really interested with that. So I wanted to participate in his capstone and talk to him about that. And he allowed me into the class, and we looked at differences in eyewitness testimony and how credible that was. And it just really led me to be interested in more aspects of the criminal justice system and how those may differ than what we think would be the typical reaction of the community. So I have just been working with him for the past year on the stalking trials study.
I'm sure it's very, very interesting. So I have a question from Natalie. This is well done. And what was your favorite part of the research project process?
My favorite part of this process was definitely seeing the results, actually. I think that I was surprised mostly by the gender differences and the verdict rendered. I did think that women were going to render more guilty verdicts, but I did not think that the difference would be so great. And it was like males almost rendered not guilty verdicts the same frequency that they rendered guilty verdicts, which was really surprising to me. So that was probably my favorite part, was looking at the actual results of the study.
Good deal.
So I have a question, Alyssa. Do you plan to continue this type of research? And is this something that is maybe possibly career-led for you?
Yes, I'm actually graduating this semester and going to UK's law school. So I am definitely interested in continuing looking at these research projects and opportunities, and kind of seeing how that extends into my future law career. So
Very nice.
Thank you, Alyssa. It's a great job.
Thank you.
And last but not the very least, Shania, it is your turn.
All right, thank you guys. Heads up, I do have a little bit of a cold, so I'm sorry for that, and please bear with me.
That's fine. So you may share your screen at any time, and you are unmuted. And I will come back on when you have about 3 minutes left if you haven't finished before then.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
All right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Shania Young, and today I will be presenting the results of my study, which was advised by Dr. Jonathan Golding, examining the perceptions of atheists within the courtroom. So first, there is a considerable amount of previous research detailing existing stereotypes and negative perceptions of those who do not believe in God. For example, one study determined that Christians are often physically disgusted by atheists. In addition, another study discovered that people generally consider atheists to engage in more criminal activity than their religious counterparts. Moreover, it was previously demonstrated that atheists are perceived by the general public to be less trustworthy than those who believe in God. And finally, a very recent study conducted by Brown, Yannuzzi et al. Found that when rape victims are described as atheists, their assailants were convicted less often. So that being said, the purpose of the present study is to determine whether these negative perceptions of atheists will persist when applied to someone accused of committing first-degree rape. For this study, there were 3 hypotheses tested. First, it was predicted that there would be a main effect of defendant religion condition, such that pro-defendant judgments like defendant credibility would be higher when the defendant is not an atheist. Secondly, it was predicted that there would be a main effect of participant gender such that conviction rates would be higher among females than male participants across all conditions. And finally, the third hypothesis is that there would be a mediation. Specifically, we predicted that the perceived morality of the defendant would mediate the relationship between the defendant's religiosity and the verdicts rendered by participants, such that atheist defendants would be perceived as less moral, therefore increasing guilty verdicts. For this study, 165 Lexington community members completed the survey. However, 18 responses had to be eliminated due to various reasons. The remaining 147 participants were between 18 and 77 years old, with an average of about 42 years old. In total, there were 87 female participants and 60 male participants. Finally, the study employed a 3x2 between subjects design, with the independent variables being defendant religion condition and participant gender. So the 3 defendant religion conditions into which participants were separated were 1, in which the defendant was described as a Christian, 2, the defendant is described as an atheist, and 3, the defendant's religious beliefs were not mentioned. The dependent variable for this study was verdict of either guilty or not guilty. The materials needed to conduct this study were a criminal trial summary and a corresponding survey. In the trial summary provided, subjects assumed the role of a mock juror for a case in which a woman alleged she was raped at knife point by a stranger she met attending a concert with her friends. The defendant testifies that he is innocent, and his religiosity is established via testimony that prior to the concert, he attended one of 3 meetings, either a Bible study meeting, an atheist support group meeting, or a book club meeting. In the survey, subjects were asked to render a verdict, to provide the reasoning behind the verdict they chose, as well as to rate various victim and defendant characteristics such as victim believability and defendant morality. To analyze the data, an analysis of variance statistical test was run. The ANOVA revealed mixed results. If you recall, the first hypothesis predicted a potential main effect of defendant religion conditions such that pro-defendant judgments would be higher when he is not an atheist. Unfortunately, this prediction was not significantly supported by the data, with a p-value of condition being 0.268. The second hypothesis tested was that there would be more convictions among female participants than male participants, regardless of condition. Fortunately, this was supported by the data with a p-value of 0.019. And finally, the third hypothesis was that the perceived morality of the defendant would mediate the relationship between the defendant's religiosity and the verdicts rendered by participants. Unfortunately, this hypothesis was also not significantly supported by the data. If you refer to figure 1, you'll be able to note, or you will notice that women convicted slightly more often for the Christian defendant than the atheist defendant, which puzzlingly contradicts expected results based on previous literature. So unfortunately, 2 of our 3 hypotheses were not significantly supported by the data. There are a few potential explanations for this. First, there may not have been any significant effect of defendant religion conditions simply because there was a weak manipulation of his religiosity. Secondly, perhaps jurors were not as concerned with defendant characteristics as they typically are with victim characteristics, which would explain the discrepancy between this study and the one about victim atheists or rape victim atheists. Perhaps these results are also evidence of the changing societal values and beliefs among newer generations. Specifically, more and more people are declaring their disbelief in a deity, which indicates that perceptions of atheism are transforming to be more positive than negative. Thus, these results could just be an effect of that change. Finally, if the study were to be replicated, perhaps we would see a significant effect of defendant religion condition and morality mediation if there were a larger number of subjects. In conclusion, while most of the hypotheses were not significantly supported by the data, the existing results are still important for psychology and law research, as some insights to the perceptions of atheists within the courtroom were gained, and there is a demonstrated need for replication and further research. Finally, I would like to give a thank you to Dr. Jonathan Golding for his support and guidance throughout this entire process, as well as Drs. Christia Brown and Rachel Farr for all of their guidance as well. Thank you all for listening and for all your time and attention. It's been an honor to present to all of you today. Thank you.
Good job, Shania. That was very good. Sounds like very interesting work as well. And And I just want to say to you, but to all the panelists as well, that you all have done a really good job supporting each other in this session by answering questions, and just your comments have been very supportive. That's a tough job to do, but you have lifted each other up very well. Good job for that. So Alyssa says, great job. There you go. So if you do have any questions for Shania, please put them in the Q&A button in the chat, or you may unmute and ask as well. So did you, what got you interested in this type of research? Was it a class with Dr. Golding? It's something to do with your career? Tell us what.
It's kind of both. So since high school, I knew that I wanted to go into the field of forensic psychology. So when choosing colleges to attend, I looked up like whether there were forensic psychology courses, and luckily UK had one taught by Dr. Golding. So I took that as soon as I could, and I looked up a lot of his publications and got really interested in everything that he researched, and noticed that a lot of his interests overlapped with mine. So for SONA credit freshman year, I participated in one of his studies that was really similar to this. And I think the next semester in another class I took of his, I've taken almost all of them. I asked him if I could eventually be a research assistant for him. And he said, you know, like, establish a relationship with me, take some more classes, make yourself known, and we'll see. And the next year, I started doing research with him. And then the following year, he suggested that I do an honors thesis. So here I am. Of course, I wanted him to sponsor me for that. So
Good deal.
yeah.
Are you are you graduating?
Yes, I'm graduating this semester.
or in the next 2 weeks? Okay.
Yeah,
Well, congratulations on that as well.
Thank
So
you.
you do have a question here from Alyssa. Do you think that the religious beliefs of the participants made an impact in their verdicts, or possibly unconscious biases from life experiences?
That's a really good question. I definitely think that religious beliefs, even though there wasn't a significant effect of religious or of religion, I definitely think that the religious beliefs of the participants played a role in their verdicts, as well as I definitely think that there were unconscious biases against, you know, atheists. Like one of the previous literature studies that I read said that like there are a lot of like people are vehemently against atheism. They think they're, you know, more corrupt. They wouldn't trust them to be in a political position. So I definitely think that biases against people who believe in God played a role in the results of the study as well.
Okay, good job. Well, thank you, everyone. That completes this session of the undergraduate showcase for 2021, I believe. Abby, do you have any final words or comments for this group?
Just that, again, to reiterate what Lynn said, great job for with everyone, like just supporting one another. That's so important. And it's not something we see in every session. So great job. And for those of you graduating, good luck. Yeah, hope you make all your dreams come true. Take care. Thank you, Lynn, for hosting this.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Thank you.